Good morning. Good Wednesday morning, good beautiful morning. It is a beautiful day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and we will be glad in it. God has given us yet another day to breathe and to smile, and He has gotten most of us up out of the bed. I'm sure there are some that may watch this that have not gotten out of the bed, but He's gotten most of us up out of the bed, and we are moving about with whatever various ailments we may have, but we are still moving about, and God is still giving us breath. Today I want to talk about the friend we have in Jesus. I want you to be encouraged today because you have a friend in Jesus. There was a song years ago, it talked about lean on me when you're not strong. That is what we need to do with Jesus. See, anyone else that we choose to lean on is an imperfect place to lean. We have to lean upon Jesus. We have to put our burden on Him so that we can take on His yoke and we can be less burdened in life. In John chapter 15, Jesus says in verse 14, He says, "You are my friends, if you do whatever I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatever you ask the Father in my name He may give you. These things I command you, that you love one another." Now, I want you to know how special that is, that Jesus is calling us friends. He's calling us friends because we have believed on Him. So we need to be excited about the fact that Jesus is calling us friends. Why? Because the only man that was called a friend of God was Abraham. When you go into the Old Testament, you go through Moses, you go through David, you go through Jacob, you go through all of the prophets, Isaiah, Samuel, all of these people. And the only man that you will find that God called friend is Abraham. 2 Chronicles 20 verse 7 tells us that. Isaiah 41:8 verifies it. Calls us friend. He didn't call Moses friend, even though he talked to Moses face to face. He didn't call David friend, even though David was a man after his own heart. He called Abraham friend. Now, we fast forward, we get over here to Jesus, and Jesus says that we are His friends. He says, "You are my friends." But he says, "If you do whatever I command." Well, what does He command? Well, He tells us that. Over in verse 12, just 2 verses earlier, He says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." Then we know that in verse 17, He verifies it again. He says it again. He repeats it to us to be sure that we understand. He says, "These things I command you, that you love one another." Over in Matthew 22, I believe it's 37 through 40, Jesus talks about the 2 great commandments. First one is to love God with all of our heart and all of our mind and all of our soul. But then He goes on and He says the second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. When we look at that word neighbor, the Greek word used there for neighbor doesn't mean next door neighbor. It can. It doesn't mean the people in our little neighborhood. It can. But what it is more often taken for is countrymen. So we are to love our countrymen. See, Jesus calls us friends when we love one another. Jesus, going back to Matthew 22:37 through 40, Jesus tells us that when we do those two, when we love God with all of our mind, heart, soul, and when we love our brother as ourselves, he says all of the law and the prophets are wrapped up in those two. In other words, he is telling us that when we love one another, truly love one another, with an agape love where we don't see the outer description like we talked about before, but that we understand the definition of that human being, that lovely golden soul that is inside of a person. When we see that person, we love them with an agape type of love. And when we talk about agape love, that is an unconditional love. That is a love that regardless of what's going on, we still love them. But Jesus gives us a warning. See, over in Genesis 22, Abraham offered up his one and only son to be sacrificed because God told him to do it. And then God stayed his hand and said, "Don't do it. I'm going to give you a ram instead." But Abraham and God shared something there. They both were willing to sacrifice their one and only son. And I have a suspicion, though I can't point to Scripture, I have a suspicion that that was where the friendship really took. That's why we hear him called friend. Jesus likewise was hated by the world. Jesus likewise was rejected by the world. Jesus lived his life in such a way as that the world did not understand it. And I believe, again, the Scripture, I'm just going to sort of make a hop here, but when we live as the world does not understand, but instead we love one another, and we love God, and we are willing to sacrifice the things most special to us in our lives, the worldly things, so that the Spirit is served and the kingdom is served. I truly believe that that is where Jesus sees us keeping his commandments, loving one another, loving God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, loving our neighbor, our countrymen, loving those that maybe don't look like us, or maybe don't act like us, or maybe don't talk like us, but we still love them with all of our hearts. I believe that's where we truly encounter the Spirit of the living God. That's where we encounter Christ. And when we encounter Christ, we realize that we indeed are his friend. And there can be nothing more encouraging in life than that. To know that we have a friend, that when we pass from this world, we will go to see him. He will be waiting on us. We don't have to worry about this world because God is putting a hedge around us. It's a spiritual hedge around us, and we don't have to worry. We have a friend in Jesus Christ. He tells us that. And when you read that word friend, I want you to understand that the friend means dear one. It doesn't just mean a friend like on Facebook. Hey, friend me on Facebook. No, that's not what Jesus is telling us here. Jesus is saying, you are dear to me. I have chosen you. Jesus chose you, and you chose Jesus through believing in him. And when we believe in him, we have done what he has called us to do. I want you to be encouraged today. I want you to feel hope today, and I want you to feel uplifted today. There is no reason to fear, because ultimately our friend is waiting to welcome us into heaven when we are done here. But we have fruit to bear. We have work to do. Be encouraged today. I love you all. I pray for you all. I pray for this nation. And you all keep praying for me, and I thank you for it.